is we can tell stories and you can have intellectual ideas and ideas about who you are. But what you want to tap into is some real visceral emotion that can cut through all of that thinking or analysis. And so that's what, again, like, who are you?
Welcome back to the Consciousness of the Way. I'm so excited to welcome the guest today, Mark Beale, who's a past life regression teacher, and humility is really his middle name personified, but I'm going to add a little bit more embellishment and realize that he has great wisdom to share with all the people that he interacts with on this path. Welcome back to the podcast from the podcast just before this one, which was a few seconds ago. How are you, my dear friend?
Oh, great. Great to be here. Thanks very much.
And so you have a very interesting origin story, and may have been born in one country, but really lived a life of sort of like the ultimate Eastern philosophy meets awakening type of thing, where you are embodying this type of stuff. Why don't you tell me a lot more, not a little, a lot more about how you got here?
Okay. Yeah. So where I am, I'm 52. I'm based in Asia, where I've lived for most of my adult life. So as you say, I'm a past life regression therapist. For 20 years, I've done, or 19 years, I've done that and nothing else but for 20 years. So that takes us back to like 33, where I qualified and got my certification and did my training in New Delhi, India. And that all happened was an 8-year process of discovering that. So I was born in New Zealand. I didn't have any healing crisis. So I'm essentially a healer as well, using hypnotic regression to take people back to past lives, this lives, between lives. A lot of people who have that have some sort of healing crisis that inspires them, or a deep spiritual interest as a youngster. I didn't really. I just sort of had a conventionally, Western interest in Western literature. I liked Hemingway and Fitzgerald, Aldous Huxley, Herman Hesse, Sartre, Camus. But Hesse got me onto Siddhartha, and from that, I got interested in like these Western intellectuals and poets and novelists are interested in Buddhism. So I had an intellectual interest in Buddhism, but I also had an economics degree and wanted to, and was interested in other forms of narrative like Wall Street by Oliver Stone. So I sort of grew up in the 1980s and thought I'll be on Wall Street and be, a sophisticated, cool, wealthy, high status, cool guy. But I got my degree and worked in the financial markets in Hong Kong, London, and Sydney, but realized pretty quickly that I didn't really want to be there long term. So I took the money and ran kind of, and I would do, it was a boom time then. So I could work 6-month contracts, in London and then go 6 months traveling in Africa and Europe and then went to Asia. And so when I was 25 years old, I sat down in a meditation retreat and it just blew the windows off my mind. It opened the doors of perception and we're off to the races. So it's an 8-year process of going from I've never heard of any of this to I'm a full-time professional past life regression therapist. And there's sort of some stories within there, but that's sort of that's some of the starting point.
Wow. Wow. I love it. It's the ultimate of ultimate perfection in relation to the origin to the end point that you were just living it. Whenever anyone asks me, how are you doing? My answer is always the same. It's good to be me. And it really does come down to that sort of like sense of self, is starting to understand the deep nature of what makes you tick.
Yeah, exactly. I always kind of had that feeling. I didn't have like a big crisis or a big problem necessarily, but I did feel with them like life was great. So it was kind of, and I then met Buddhism, and I did. I mean, it sounds a bit funny to say it, but it did resonate with like the Buddha was born into a beautiful palace and was having a great time, and I was like, I rode a motorcycle across the Himalayas. I learned how to paraglide in Sydney and flew some in the Himalayas again, and was able to travel around the world and have a great lifestyle. But with on all of that, there was just this subtle little existential thought that even though everything's kind of perfect, there is something missing. There's something that there is more to it somehow I felt, because I've got everything, everything's as good as it can be, but it feels like there's something there. And it was just that little thing that made me think, I'm going to go and see if I can find out what that is. And on that first meditation retreat, I sat and tried to meditate, and I accidentally went into a hypnotic state instead. Like they're pretty close, but then I had a spontaneous regression that reminded me. Actually, I thought I wasn't that much of a spiritual guy, but I remembered that when I was 10 years old, I was reading another book. I just loved read thousands of books, and one of them was a book on how to hypnotize people. And it was not just that I read the book, but I remembered we were on a holiday with my family, and I said to my mother and my sister, lie down, close your eyes, follow your, and I hypnotized them. And I had this memory at 25 while trying to meditate. And I had to literally call my mother and say, did I hypnotize you when I was a kid? She says, yeah, yeah, you did a great job of it. And I remembered I did self-hypnosis. I was like, actually, I did have a sort of a spiritual healing quality to me. And it's the same thing when I started reading the Buddhism. I was like, all this Western literature that I thought was intelligent was only just trying to scratch the surface. And I read the Dharma and the Upanishads and was like, wow, this is what I've been sort of thinking in the back of my mind, but couldn't put into words. And now they've just said it just so perfectly and beautifully. And you just weep for the joy of, what perfection. And you can only do that if you're, remembering it or rediscovering it or connecting it at a deep level. So then that finite sense of self of Mark, who's got an economics degree, starts to transcend and become aware of a karmic self that has been incarnated in these countries and these cultures and these traditions. And that's part of who you are. You're not just limited to whatever, movie you saw when you were 10 in this life. And then that leads you into a sense of self beyond all form and it does get you into that ineffable but beautiful infinite version of self that blows the windows open. Then you have to sort of bring that back into reality and think, well, how do I bring that into a working functional way of being? But a lot of fun doing it.
Oh man, where do we start? I mean, look, your embrace of the silver screen, and there's an infatuation with Hollywood, man, pop culture, that went to the roots of who I became and was engrossed in as a child. That was really, part of
Mm.
how I ended up where I am today. Is really, that was my, surrogate virtual father to make it
Well,
right.
I'm
Was
curious, how did you interpret it? Because it can be kind of enlightening, but it can be sort of deceptive and get you off on another path. What was your interpretation, or what was the effect
oh,
of cinema for you?
well, absolutely. It just enhanced what I was looking for. So when I was
Okay.
4 years old, it was very comfortable being a latchkey kid. So, my mother, if we were to measure parenting in those days and parenting now, well, quite frankly, my mother would probably be looking at 20 years in jail, because most of the time I was left alone due to the circumstance and being a single parent. And she really just had to sort of grind just to keep the lights on. So I was
Mm.
left to my own devices. So as a young boy, one of the first things I noticed, having only one limitation, which my mother would keep the theme the same throughout my whole life. If you put your mind to anything, it's possible. Anything is possible if you put your mind to it. And that was it. That was the takeaway of her parenting in a nutshell. And the fact that she would give me unconditional kisses and hugs and reminding me how much she was so in love with her beautiful son. But realizing at the age of 4 that I could see through my hand and into the next wall, into the next room, gave me some insight. Then I started to feed on superheroes. And then that was my next graduation level. And at the age of 10, I got into bodybuilding and powerlifting seriously. And then by
Yeah.
the time I was in my late teens, the message was the hubcaps are coming off the wheels, because I'd grown into this monster, not having any limitation on it, because my Bible was Education of a Bodybuilder by this guy by the name of Arnold Schwarzenegger. And so I read that at 10 going, this is it. This is the answer to everything. Integrating into, understanding the deep nature of nutrition. By the time I was 12 or 13 years old, competing for the first time when I was 15, and then moving into that and obsessed with powerlifting and bodybuilding because it showed me evidence of strength. Evidence is what we're looking for. You know, you as a hypnotist stroke past life regression expert, you understand the most valuable commodity is your attention, your focus. That's it. That's where we get the secret sauce. That's where we can dash in the back door and play around with the wiring and reprogram how you perceive reality for your own pleasure. And I mean, that's how the simplicity of it is. Attention, intention, you find result. And, you know, in any case, it ended up in mystical experiences.
Yeah, well, the interpretation you have of that is a lot, and so you know you can look at a superhero thing and sort of see the surface level, and even just the muscularity, but you know you could that, but if that can lead you to like a health and a strength, as opposed to a lot of people will just see the cosmetic and go for the cosmetic and not be particularly healthy or strong, but have the look. So you're seeing these movies and interpreting them at a deep level. But kind of part of my question for you was like, because there can be, you can see a movie and understand the hero's journey and the real themes, or you can misperceive it and misunderstand it and be led astray.
Mm.
Which is into like a superficial kind of version, which isn't about health and wellness and fitness. It's about strength, or even real strength. It's about the facade of looking like something, but not actually being it. And you know, for me, that's also with I'd watch Wall Street, and Oliver
My
Stone would
favorite
say,
movies. Charlie
Is
Sheen,
it?
my boy. I'm an 80s alcoholic of
Okay,
of the
yeah.
80s.
Well,
So
you know,
everything 80s is my thing.
we're the same generation, and that was the thing then. What like the goal was to sort of be like party like a rock star, even if you're not one, and that meant make the money, do all that stuff, and absolutely. And so he was kind of a role model, and that was when we're growing up, that's what it was. But the funny thing was, that movie was a critique of Wall Street. Whereas a lot of people interpreted it as being like a roadmap of how to have a good life and be a cool person. And so they'd come up to Oliver Stone and say, "Oh, I've got to tell you, you inspired me to work on Wall Street because of your great movie." And he would think that wasn't the point of the movie. He didn't understand it. And I remember Bud Fox, if you remember, Bud Fox in the movie says, "I don't care about all of this finance stuff. All I want is to make enough money to ride my motorcycle across China for a year." And that was it, and try not to get into jail. And so I saw that and thought, and then wanted to say to Oliver Stone, your movie inspired me to quit working on Wall Street and to ride a motorcycle across India. And you know what? I actually ended up working in a very high-end, beautiful wellness resort in Thailand where Oliver Stone would often stay. Now, I didn't get to meet him or work with him, but I did see him walking around the resort and thought, I want to be that guy who says, you inspired me to quit Wall Street with your movie. And I rode a motorcycle and I've been riding it for 20 years. And now I'm doing this kind of work that, you get it, you're into it. And that's the message that I picked up. But it's so funny. People can miss, and that's what I see in past life regression as well. People ask me, I want to know who I was in a past life. And I go, we don't even know who we are in this life, half the time, or we think we're trying to be a misunderstanding of a character that we saw in a movie, and so part of it is understanding who we are now and then what has caused that. So there's a root cause in these things that happen when we're kids, but then there can be other root causes in the past. So I had this conditioning that led me to the West and exposed me to these kind of influences. But as I say, when I got back to India, I just brought back floods of past life memories from being in Eastern cultures, and that helped me choose to reconnect with some of those earlier things and walk more of the Dharma influence path than the, try and be a modern financy guy.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point. I was actually going to go into a little series on my YouTube where I, just integrate yin and yang into every aspect of every possibility, and cinema being a favorite of mine up to the point that it was completely destroyed by the Chinese Communist Party, but that's another story altogether. But the silver screen back in the 80s, where you captured a real slice of like heaven and you brought it to the screen and people were immersed in it, and they loved the characters, they loved the variables. So for example, something like Karate Kid is integrated very much into how I teach people, for the simplicity of, you are exhibiting what I refer to as the Mr. Miyagi effect, where you are integrating a foundational level of understanding that doesn't meet your intellect. Your finite mind is not being commandeered by the information. You are embodying it. It is a visceral thing that goes beyond the knowledge, beyond the wisdom, but it's an embodiment. And then you start to really craft your skill, because you realize that it seems dull at first glance. And then once you look closer, you rub it a couple of times and it's a beautiful shiny diamond. And so that's how you integrate. That's how I normally teach people to get really deep into their center, then absorb the center, and then realize they are everything. And so you have to have some level of method, which I find is quite easy for people to start that path by having a method to their madness, rather than giving them a heavy scripture that they're supposed to understand. That most people, any sort of potent scripture, like the ones that you talk about, that you literally embodied almost instantaneously reading it, that's not the average journey for most people. So when they get something like a Tao Te Ching or a Dharma or things of that nature, their head explodes, and they have something that's going on like viscerally, but they cannot put their finger on it. That's where wisdom teaching comes in. And I believe that what you're giving back to consciousness and humanity is so really important to help people find who they are.
Yeah, I love that you bring up movies as well. So I did do Kokushinkai karate for a couple of years because you know it's 10 years old when that movie came out, and yeah, I got that influenced me in that way. Although yeah, it was years later that the Indian culture really hit me. But it reminds me that so if I can trade back another movie, my YouTube channel, by the way, uh, my number one video is a analysis of the movie I Origins, if you've heard of that. And so that's
Where
about
was that
past
from? The
like
80s? Was that from the 80s?
no, that's sort of maybe 10 years old.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
10, 15 years. So I just spoiler alert. It's about a scientist who's trying to explore if past lives are real or not. And his girlfriend, he has a romantic love affair, but his girlfriend is killed and cut in half by an elevator. And he then goes on a quest to find her and does and finds her as a young girl in India. And he's trying to analyze and he's actually trying to match irises. The theory being that irises are they transfer across and they're so unique, but they stay the same as you reincarnate, which is a bit of a fanciful idea, but it's a part of the narrative. But what happens is he finds this girl and he tries to do all these tests and he's trying to do it intellectually. And it's sort of going okay because he was right in his assumption, but he's trying to intellectually figure it out and do it with things that you can see, things that you can hear, and he gets sort of mixed messages that are inconclusive. But at the end of it, as he's taking her and saying, well, that was sort of what we're still not sure and we're still trying to figure it out and we're trying to intellectually work it out and we haven't really got it. But as he's walking her out of the testing room, they stand next to an elevator again, which recreates the scene of her past death. And she has an abreaction and a deep emotional reaction to that. She's getting triggered that past life memory. And so part of this is we can tell stories and you can have intellectual ideas and ideas about who you are. But what you want to tap into is some real visceral emotion that can cut through all of that thinking or analysis. And so that's what, again, like, who are you? And we're shaped by things that have affected us. And they are often, and so whenever I'm working with people, I'm working as a therapist, really, in that we're looking for root causes that have very strong visceral emotions and ultimately some sort of trauma. So we go to our past life, but we also go to our past deaths. And they have a pretty strong influence on some of the residues we carry over. Or we can have experiences that are a fate worse than death, and we carry that residue with us. And so that requires a kind of poetry. and a kind of narrative, which is there's a theme here that we're exploring, but it's not just an intellectual idea that we can sit around and talk about in cafes while we're smoking cigarettes. It's something which is sort of really visceral and punches us in the stomach, whether you like it or not, and says, this is what it's about. So, so you want a movie or any story, a narrative to have a real punch to it. It really hits you. So, yeah, so that's a great movie actually.
Interesting. I might have
Yeah.
to take a look-see. It's kind of like it
Yeah.
brings me back to Wall Street again. Some of my faves. It starts
Yeah.
with a deep prophet like realization to a movie back in the 80s, a really enlightening spiritual consciousness path that was titled Risky Business.
Yeah.
And the dream is always the same. Instead of going home, I go to the neighbors. The door's open. I go inside. I'm looking around for the people, but no one seems to be there. I hear the shower going, so I go upstairs to see what's what. And furthermore, you layer in this dream and, the narrative of the character, Joel, and his exploration of who he is while his parents are out of town living a fantasy, calling up, hookers and just a myriad of events that go from high to low to high to low. But then you return back to Gordon Gekko. The Falcon meets the Falconer, buddy boy. And greed is good. But in essence, that idolizing of that character really brought him back to the moral compass of his father that he lost sight of. And it became more and more further from the truth. And then where do you walk in that path? Like as we talk, you are having a visceral effect. Your body is emanating energy and you're oscillating. You're getting a charge. How do I know this? I see it because it's part of the conditioning of the training that I teach people, which is like a clairvoyant sensory perception. You get to see things and you can taste the energy, not just from your mind, but with your eyes open. It's a developed skill of awareness, just as anything else is. And as you get deeper into the narrative, and I mean, the reason that Mark finds this really valuable is this would be a normal path of an awareness that you use some type of metaphor, taking the attention from the subject and giving them the ability to pace and lead themselves into their own remembrance at a much deeper level, a cadence that just has them fall into the cup. And then they embody that. And then they start to go back in time where we don't need roads, Marty. We do not need the roads that are necessary to find thyself. But, this is what was exciting within that whole adventure of my own, was realizing that this kind of nurturing narrative doesn't exist in cinematic assets these days. They're kind of very mechanical, and some of them are so overworked that you get way into your head. That's my observation anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. As you say that, there's a lot of emphasis on, loud noises and, visual effects. Whereas, a lot of the older school movies could really, they did less, and it made you then, it created a bit of space. Even there's not a lot of space in movies these days. When you watch something from the 70s now, the amount of quiet time, just a guy walking around, and there's an adjustment, but it's the kind of thing that you kind of it almost creates an anxiety because it's sort of so calm and not overwhelming you with stuff. But then you sort of have to relax into it, and then it creates a state in you rather than bombarding you with a bunch of stuff on the surface. It creates an inner state within you, and then that movie becomes an experience that that it co-creates within you rather than something that it does to you. And that's profound, and that's what you're doing as well. You're a pretty hypnotic guy with what you're doing there. So there's what you're saying, but there's the thing that you can do on the surface, but the state of being you create and that you have within and transmit to others. The best of any art form is transmitting a felt personal experience, And that's really why what people do meditation as well. It's just that's an ultimate of, watching the movie theater of your mind to a degree, and sitting in the quiet and the spaces in between, and yeah, not being dictated to by what an external director, whether they say, watch these movies and be like this, or, then it becomes sort of up to you to become the movie director of your own experience, and be the, and not be the audience member, but be the star to a degree, or at least the actor who's taking actions, which is karma. You're taking karmic actions, and another karmic action can just be being passive and not going on these journeys. And if you take it too extreme, so I like that. What you're talking about movies, you watch a movie about a bodybuilder, then you go lift weights. You don't watch 100 more movies about bodybuilders. You're actually doing it. So I watch movies about guys traveling the world, then I went and traveled the world. I didn't watch 1,000 more movies about traveling. You've got to go do it. You got to lift the weights. You got to pound the pavements, and that's a great joy in there, in that. You know what I mean? And so that's part of it. It's as things have developed, it's little concern that things may be a little bit too vicarious as well.
Yeah, they're
You
not
know,
participating in their own remembrance. They're like the voyeur. They're sitting in the background. Like I don't want to get too twisted, but they're the cuckold. They're like literally not participating in the event. And you look at someone like Schwarzenegger, and there was
yeah.
an allure to him because he had already decided he knew who he was at a very young age. And so
Mm,
when I read Education of a Bodybuilder, it was about bodybuilding and powerlifting was not about aesthetic, where today this is all a superficial, opaque version of reality. Everyone is about some type of stressor, anti-aging hormones, PEDs,
mm,
some way to stimulate an avatar of themselves that is so not real, and it collapses after you've constructed it, or just deconstruct itself. Whereas the history of time for myself, I entered into that
mm,
where that was not, it wasn't just spoken words, it was a lifestyle, it was a belief system, and it was met with nutrition and deep understanding of the body, and that you were breathing and living this emanation of the the iron priest, the priest of
mm,
all priests, when it comes to the ability to worship that tool. And when you applied it, oh my goodness. And I honestly was deluded until about 17 or 18, when I started looking for something more, when I had a voice in my head saying, you need to now get, I was getting up to 800-pound deadlifts and squats and stupid superhuman stuff, and my body looked very complementary to that definition. And people would be like, well, what are you taking? And I'm like, what do you mean, what am I taking? Because I was mentored. Now you start looking at all these things, and if you believe in reincarnation and incarnation and spirits and things of that nature, which is the world I live in, I teach people how to channel their own true source of information from a dialogue to a monologue. That could be another topic of conversation. But when you directly source that, you have a very, very clear path of understanding who you are and returning to nothing. Whereas most people, they are commandeered and they're puppeteered, and they are the minions that are the sheep that are not participating in their experience at all. And so for me, up until 18, I had no idea, because my mentor was a bodybuilder that took a ton of steroids, but never ever mentioned it once to me. I was under the understanding, through the application of exercise and nutrition, and he had a very powerful understanding of nutrition, that you would be able to achieve these goals. And so I lived that part. I started fasting when I was 10 years old. So knowing how to do these things in a very deep level, and I was using MCT oils at that age also. So understanding ketosis and what that really meant for the body, and how to change the fuel system of the body and the neurology of it, and understanding how the nervous system worked when you applied stress upon it with weight, things changed altogether. Yet I was very much, I needed to understand and absorb stuff. It was an excitement for me. I absorbed information very quickly. And so that coming to the age of 18 and someone told me that Arnold Schwarzenegger took steroids, because we didn't have the internet back in those days. So I didn't have some stressor outside going, hey, yeah, he's on roids. And like, what is that? Like, that's how much we're in that space back in those days, where without the internet, you don't really understand what that really means. The closest thing we had for bodybuilders was a thing called the Underground Handbook for Steroids. And that was a Bible that floated around some OG bodybuilders that were clearly harnessing this stuff and keeping it to themselves. I was never met with that sort of seedy side of bodybuilding. And so when I heard that he had taken steroids, someone put I literally popped my bubble. It took me a while to get back to normal on that one. I was like, hang on a second. You mean it just didn't make any sense to me? And this kind of happens a lot, right?
People can do the same thing for very different reasons. So some people, like it sounds like that's another form of disciplined practice. So you would have been a spiritual disciple of a spiritual tradition in your past lives. Then you get born into this culture, which puts those heroes up, and then you are culturally conditioned to now lift weights, but you're still being a disciplined disciple of the Iron Church, as you say. But you're sort of doing that, bringing in these residues of being a disciplined spiritual person, but with a lot of these positive qualities. Whereas other people will be in the gym lifting because they've got a great pain or a great vulnerability through some painful experiences they as a kid where they didn't have power and were probably had other people did, and they are doing it so that I won't be hurt again, and that this strength will protect me from bad things that have happened to me in the past. And do you see what I mean? And so, does that make sense to you? And
Oh,
is that,
absolutely. I mean,
yeah,
everyone lives out their fantasies and realize their reality.
yeah. I mean, were some other, were there some, and you think that's right as well? Like, were there some other things that drove you to it, or that inspired? You can be inspired to do it. You can be running towards the weights in order to gain something, or you can be running away from something, and the weights are something that people use, as a sort of protection thing. So that's something, I see that a lot in past life regression. So I will regress people to the past, and sometimes it is to past traumas, as I've talked about, but a lot of times it is to these past abilities as well. And so, yeah, so you're able to get, obviously there's a bit of both with everybody. But, it just comes back to that interpretation. You interpret it, but you interpret it based on who you are. But who you are is somebody who's got these past wounds or these past skills that you're wanting to continue to develop.
Yeah, I mean, the different iterations of that came in all forms. Being an artist, I would draw superheroes nonstop, bodybuilders, and most of my mother's friends would be like, you know what? I think he's a little, and she's like, what are you talking about? He's obsessed with dudes with big muscles, and that's all he does. It's like, you might have to pull a rainbow out for this guy. And she's like, oh, no. Because she was a radical feminist from the 70s, she was being whitewashed and brainwashed herself with her own ideology that was in the land of academia and diluted by, round table events every Friday night with a fine bottle of wine and theorizing over like Rumi and Sigmund Freud. I mean Freud, and all these types of people that were influenced by the psyche, and that is a sure recipe for dismay and despair and actually delusion, which is what she confesses to now as being part of her self-realization. 80 clicks into her new life, and the truth is like, it was a level of mind control, and that's what academia really is mind control.
It reminds me of what you were talking about before when you said my mother left me alone and let the cinema do my upbringing,
Mhm.
but she would come in and be caring at some point. So I was thinking, on one hand, it could be like, that could be the kind of damage or thing that but it can go either way, which is like maybe she left you alone too much or maybe not quite enough. Because if she'd left you alone a little bit more, you'd be Quentin Tarantino. And a lot of these things that are supposedly harming us are actually kind of a way of awakening us to what isn't true. And so being exposed, at an egregious degree to fraudulent BS is the kind of thing that, sometimes we need a bit more pain than we've got so that we can see really clearly what it is and be really motivated to take action that repudiates it or I disagree with that, but because of that, I know what I am, and it's not that. But if that's all you do, you're a cynic or a complainer. But it is this, and so that's even part of it for me. I realize that a life chasing material fulfillment or as much money as you can have it the person with the most toys at the end wins and working like 60 70 hours a week to get that and to like win some sort of game. I've thought that a lot of those gold was fool's gold, and it got me to the point where I would sit in meditation and think the wisdom in these pages and in these experiences, that's the real gold, and I will forfeit the career and the status and all these things that I thought were told to think are cool, and I'll sit on this cushion until as long as it takes to find out what the alternative is, and I don't regret doing it, you know. And so I even really had a past life. Actually, reminds me as well of one of the spontaneous hypnotic regressions I had. I remembered being, and so in fact, even just to tell a little story, within the first few days of my meditation retreat, they interrupted it. I was just getting in the rhythm, and they said we're going to go down and have a little field trip. And the next thing I knew, we were down in Dharamsala, which is where I was doing this retreat, and standing in a line ready to meet the Dalai Lama. And a few minutes later, I'm shaking his hand and feeling his energy. And everyone else was like bowing, and I can't believe this. And I've wanted to meet you my whole life. And I sort of knew who he was, but sort of didn't. And so I just sort of stuck up my hand like a conventionally trained Westerner and said, hello. And he just sort of looked at me and sort of laughed at me. And I laughed at myself. And I walked away smiling. And then kept walking and kept smiling and tried to stop smiling. And I couldn't. And I was like, they say that guy is, he's a human being. And I just shook his hand. He's flesh and blood. But he's also the 14th Dalai Lama because he's got 13 documented past lives. And I've got this buzzing, energetic, beautiful feeling in my body. And I was sitting up there on the hill thinking, what they're saying about a lot of things is beautiful, but is reincarnation really real? Is that, a step too far? But meeting an embodied energy like that is part of what made me think I'm going to stick out this 10-day retreat, and I'll probably come back for another one. And I had a past life where I had a similar experience where I was an Indian, wealthy enough not to have to work, but not so wealthy that I was, seduced by or had a lot of responsibility. And so it's a very comfortable existence, which a lot of us have these days. But with that, I became complacent. I remembered at the same age meeting a wise man and thinking, oh, it's great. I've got this ability in life to meet healers and spiritual teachers, and I felt great about it in my past life. But then I fast forwarded to later on in that life, and I realized with all the opportunities that I had in the spare time for spiritual practice and the masters that I could meet, but I realized that I got complacent. I hadn't taken the opportunities, and I went and I felt this deep, piercing, visceral gut punch of regret. And I don't want to have that opportunity and miss it. And I missed it in that life. And I felt, but it was too late. It was a life wasted. And have reliving this, the life circumstances played out again. Fortunate existence, got the ability to travel and meet amazing masters and healers and encounter the Dharma as a blessing, they say, in the first place, but then being able to practice it. And so that was part of something that motivated me. that this time I won't let it slip through my fingers. And there is some risk and pain in taking the chance to abandon comfort and certainty and to go into the uncertainty. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay the bills doing this. It's nice to be able to travel around when you're 20s, but once you get to your 30s, you got to grow up and get a real job. But it was something I thought I'm gonna get rich or die trying, or get enlightened or die trying, or be on the spiritual path and not get sidetracked or forgetful and just sort of slip back into a traditional path. And so that was something for me as well. That's sort of part of that thing of even that the painful regret that I remembered was something that sort of really motivated me and inspired me. And that happened just as I was graduating from my past life regression training. And it's something that I've wanted to get up and have just beautiful experiences where you together, you share these hypnotic experiences with your clients and have things that you think I never knew that you could have such beautiful, deep interactions with people as a hypnotist and subject. Uh, and I always look forward to that. But it's also, I'm doing it because I love doing it, but also I'd hate to not do it and to miss out on it. And so that's something as well. I think a lot of people have these opportunities, but they, for one way or another, they hesitate, delay, doubt, worry, second guess themselves, overthink it. And they do that for 20 years and wake up and go, whoops, while I was thinking all that BS, I wasn't doing it. But there has to be some big slap in the face that says all of that chit chat and, what am I going to do? Like, just do it. And, obviously within rational boundaries and integrated over time. But, there are going to be certain pivot points in people's lives where I just remind them of, regret and is a powerful thing. And sometimes, the biggest risk you take is in taking no risks at all.
Yeah, I mean, it comes back to the basic simplicity. We refer to it as the great bellows. Everything is contracting and expanding at the same time. You're all things and nothing at the same time. Depending upon how cooked or undercooked you are, you're going to say, what is that? That is blowing my mind. And you just fall back into the paradox of paradoxes and have your head explode on your journey of self-remembrance. And it always starts and ends with that same simplicity. It's that symbiosis, that dance between yin and yang from the same string. Yep. And you're either inverted with the colors, which is yin, all colors, the inversion, the absorption of all colors is yin, the emission of all colors is yang. And your mission, if you choose to accept it, Ethan Hunt, is to find that center point, walk into it, and then realize there is none. And then you are actualized as a reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. No, I'm just kidding.
I love that bellows because a lot of people, whether in some way, like they breathe in and then they don't. And so breath, there's the in breath and the out breath, but there's also the space in between. But people breathe in, but then they don't want to exhale because they're afraid if I give away, if I become vulnerable, if I let out, then where's my next air coming from? And so they're just sort of holding their breath, waiting for things to happen. But if you know that I can exhale and be at peace and not anxious, and in that space, knowing that I'll be able to breathe in again, I can exhale one way of being, but I can inhale another one. But as you're exhaling, you're creating some sort of void or vacuum, and we get afraid of that and then try to go back to what we were. But it's sort of having that trust that I can exhale and have completely empty lungs, knowing that I will be able to inhale again. But a lot of people, I think, are just walking around just holding their breath, thinking that there isn't a bellows. It's just sort of one way, and you've got to grasp onto it with all your for your life. But again, you try and save your life, you lose it in a lot of ways. But if you have faith that I can give everything away in order to create the space to bring in the refreshing breath that I really need, not the stale old one that I've been handed down.
Yeah. I mean, that's really the gateway for a Taoist. We refer to that as the primordial mother. So between the breath in and the breath out is the Wu Ji. That's the secret source. So when you recognize there's that symbiosis, and then the center point of that is the absorption of the riches. It's not holding with fear of lack. It's holding to enter and evoke the spirit. It's a different level of awareness, but it does get to the same point if you start to condition yourself through a path of cultivation.
Yeah, people can be doing that. You're doing the same thing. You're holding with the right understanding and intention. Other people can be holding with the wrong understanding and intention. It still kind of looks like you're doing the same thing, but your understanding is transcendent. And yeah,
Yeah,
that's cool. I love that, the bellows.
yeah, because
I mean,
we.
and that and
No, go
well,
ahead.
it just reminds me that it's also there's the expansion and contraction of the universe and the expansion and contraction of the breath. And so this is like if you sit on a pillow too long, you really start thinking about breathing. But yeah, it is so cosmic. It's so minuscule, but it's so massive and universal.
I mean, that's really part of the ancient path of cultivation for alchemy. That's where the rubber
Mm.
meets the road. When you start alchemizing all the things that are infrastructure, the energetic infrastructure within the body, then you start to turn into the Harry Potter of your Merlin, and crazy things happen. Are you there, Mark? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
You
yeah,
just froze
actually.
a little bit
I've
there.
got
Um,
actually I have. Okay. Yeah, so I can hear you, but my camera is still got the light on.
yeah,
But yeah, let's just see. Maybe I'll off and on it.
it'll probably pop back on, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, that's really when you start to realize that, accessing autonomous autonomic nervous system, which would probably be closer to a hypnotist's roadmap to unraveling your consciousness and bleeding the two together and making you superhuman, realizing you can access every part of yourself through that process. So, let's talk about a little bit about hypnosis, because I find that it's such a dirty word for many people, and they run from it because they're afraid that they're going
Mm.
to bark like a dog and cluck like a chicken. This is kind of the general consensus watching it, or it's not real. And I think I find it funny. I mean, I take my kids down because I'm transmitting outside of I'm in Las Vegas. We do street magic a lot, so they learn, they're very, very developed in relation to hypnosis and understanding how to acquire that conscious state. And then furthermore, then they get into more clairvoyant things that are not on the menu of a general hypnotist, that sensory perception and those type of developed skills become normal as a child if you have no barriers. So they pick it up very quickly. But street magic for me is asking someone if they want to experience bliss, and that turns into their friends videotaping them having a magical mystery right in the same second. When you look at hypnosis, that has a word that activates, same as being mesmerized and things of that nature. We're carrying over time linguistics that make it possible for you to remember the state, using it as a vehicle to access parts of yourself that would normally not be accessible. And so even though I'm not applying it to you, you do it naturally. You're falling into the cup yourself, and so am I. I'm as high as a kite because the energy is dense and palpable. But I would have to reference my dear teacher Latsu, who I am the catalyst and conduit of his transmission 24/7. So it's a resonance that precedes the avatar. And when you do the resonance, for me, I'm not the typical person. If I'm showing you an example of that, you're going to instantly fall into a somnambulistic state that doesn't seem like you could possibly do that when you have no reference point. I'm not like taking you through the command or suggestion processes or protocol, but because I'm transmitting that frequency, you instantly fall into it, and people freak out. They're like, but you didn't do the traditional look into my eyes, find a focus point, and sleep. But they instantly fall into that state, and it's a transmitted state that doesn't need words. I mean, NLP is an interesting distortion of reality, but it was concocted by a bunch of people that wanted to control the world. And I don't know whether it's working that well lately because they don't understand the fundamentals of it. But hey,
Yeah, I know what you mean. Well, Richard's a character. Let's put it that way. Richard Bandler. So, but yeah, look, you're right. Hypnosis, and it is people like Richard Bandler and and other hypnotists who are the form of some of those perceptions, but that is still kind of a minuscule portion of what hypnosis is. And it speaks again to the kind of narrative that we pick up. But in a sense, hypnosis is something which is very natural. It's implicit in a lot of the wisdom traditions. It's implicit in a lot of our daily experience. But this idea of sort of the clinical stereotype of a hypnotist who gives you suggestions and is just such a tiny fraction of it. And the ultimate reality goes beyond that. And it's also the way that we perceive it, which is what makes us think that we're not being hypnotized by so many other things in our society already. So for me, in a way, hypnosis, there are people who don't have much of a spiritual basis and do hypnosis for breaking habits, etc. But that's why I emphasize my institute is the Past Life Awakening Institute. And so I use hypnosis to de-hypnotize people from the hypnosis that already been put in by authority figures or in our politicians or some of our movie directors in a way hypnotize us and put in suggestions like work in finance, be a good little soldier for capitalism, and then we get hypnotized by that and go ahead and do it, and so a lot of times we're awakening from an old hypnosis and awakening to a trance that can be transformative and can transform us from our finite self into to move us towards our infinite self. So it's kind of like fire or water. You can drown in it, or and it can be a bad thing that is sort of condemned, or it can be the lifeblood that we need. So to me, hypnosis is really just like water or fire. It's not necessarily good or bad. It's implicit in the human experience, and if you use it wrong, you burn yourself. But if you use it right, you'll be heated and well fed. So, make sure you're using it right and that other people aren't, again, like you're not a spectator in somebody else's pool, that you're.
Well, I know. I mean, people. I think one of the biggest crux would have to be when the average hypnotist says, "Listen, you have complete control." That's a fundamental lie. You can only be hypnotized if you want to be. That's just a lie because take a cell phone, take a TV, take a group think scenario, mob mentality. You are going to bleed into the stream that is constant for that moment, and you will be hypnotized if you are not aware of that. That means have dominion over yourself. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we are hypnotized by so many things. So it's not just hypnotists, And so, absolutely, this is what I say. Like, when is having dominion over yourself is huge because people say like, I want to know who I was in a past life. That's why I say we don't necessarily know who we are in this life because we've accepted so many suggestions from all sorts of people and things, and we think I am that. That's part of the awakening, realizing what you're not. So even as you're talking about, the difference between being a bodybuilder who's a discipline, a disciple, and a disciplined practitioner, you're chipping away the marble to find the muscular, strong superhero within. And other people are just going around picking up bits of broken stone and piecing it together into some sort of mask or armor that they can wear to protect themselves from the world, but not really developing themselves and at a deep level on the inside. So it all comes back to, is there anything really good or bad in the world? But how do you use it? What's really happening?
Well, and I mean
Yeah.
well, that's like a history lesson, right? Over time, I always start with something simplistic. Have you ever heard the expression "survival of the fittest"? And they're like, "Yeah." I mean, I use that all the time. You have any idea the origin story behind where that might have come from? And they're like, "I don't know. I just know. I just know." And I'm like, "Interesting." And of course, you and I understand that's a Darwin's theory of reality that sets in, and that's what he's implementing as truth. Okay, so it's held the test of time from the 1600s to now as being something that's a throwaway that no one can really understand what it means, but they know.
Mm.
Like I see someone with a tattoo on their forehead, and it's the yin and yang, and I'm like, wow, that's so cool. And I'm like, what inspired you to put that tattoo on your body? And they're like, I don't know, I just like it. I feel like it symbolizes what I understand about things, the good and bad, the in and out, the up and down. I'm like, that's just amazing. Because again, this is something so ancient for someone like myself. It goes back thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of years as a symbol of the nature of reality is yin and yang, from perceiving things as dualistic to
Mm.
realizing there isn't any, and then ultimately there is no center to anything, that you are everything and nothing at the same time. I rest my case, Your Honor. And then your head explodes.
That's pretty much it. Yeah, that's what it all comes down to. Yep.
And
Yeah.
so I mean, when you use the past life regression, for me, when I do any past lives for people, it's a normal set scenario. They lay down, it turns into a movie screen. It runs in their third eye, their eyes closed. They have a visceral experience, and I can shift through as many lives. I normally stick to 9. It gives you a pretty fundamental understanding of somebody from 9 to now. And that all
Mm.
of a sudden, whatever that is, as weird as it comes up, whether you're a rock, an elephant, a human being, a transmitted state of whatever it is, they take those pieces and put it together and go, holy shit, that makes sense about what's happening to me right now in my life. I'm like, good. I mean, that's part of the path. And embodying that is the visceral response that you get when you go into that state, and you're literally capturing things that you're like, this is not my language. This is not my thoughts. These are, where did all this stuff come? How come all of a sudden you crack a doorway open to something that I didn't even know existed? And I think you probably have some incredible reflections on why that's so magical for you and why you've committed yourself for the last 20 years to this, because it's so transformative when you witness someone wake the F up to themselves from an experience like the one I spoke of. And furthermore, how do you capture that within your own processes?
Yeah, a lot of what you said is exactly what I do, and you're emphasizing exactly the right things. And so there are people that do past life regression as if it's some sort of tourism. Like, I want to know, who I was. So you do,
Yeah.
but then like, so what? And so what the thing that you said was that then ties back to exactly who they are and what's happening in this moment in this life.
Mm.
And that's when it stops. But that's what's important, because there's so many moments, so many past lives. So when you say 9 or so numerous past lives, absolutely, people have had a lot of past lives, and then a lot of moments in those lives. So which specific moment and which past life do we go to? The subconscious, the ultimate wisdom has, a million choices. And if it's going to choose 9 lives and, one scene per, how does it choose it? And this is where the real magic comes in, because it knows that it can create a narrative structure out of those, a 3-part act, beginning, middle, and end of part 1, beginning, middle, end of part 2, beginning, middle, end of part 3. There's your 9. And now you've got a beautiful, complex, lovely movie. And that movie in itself is, oh, I was this person, I was the character, but it's also got the narrative story, and it's got the themes. And that theme means all of that adds up to I was in Atlantis, and I was a great healer. Well, I was a student of healing. But then the fall came, and I blamed myself and felt guilt. And now I'm in this life, and I'm a psychologist because I love healing. And I want to be a past life regression therapist, but I'm scared to, because last time and then I was a witch, or I was burnt as a witch, but as actually a herbalist. And then I had this patient in the middle, in the Wild West, but my patient accused me falsely of wrongly medicating them. And so I've been a healer, but it's had so much pleasure and it's had so much pain. Now I want to evolve as a healer, but I've got all these conflicting forces. But now that I get to see how all of that's doing and I get to understand it for a first part and bring in some sort of therapeutic resolution to it, now I'm free to go on and be the healer that I plan to be in my between lives that I also touched on. I love that you mentioned, some interdimensional being. It doesn't have to just be all in this life. And because of that, I can now, instead of thinking, oh, should I become a hypnotherapist or a past life therapist for the next 5 years? You actually just go ahead, book the training, do it, and you spend the next 5 years doing it instead of thinking about it because you had that breakthrough experience. And that comes back to, like me having that deep regret. Instead of, waking up 20 years later, I hypnotized myself into complacency, or I woke up with that pain and just got on with it and did it, and so that's a lot of the stories. I got my book, Past Life Awakening. It's a lot of healers actually, and that's something I do find. A lot of half of my students that I train are conventionally trained healers. They've got psychology degrees, they're social workers, they're scientists, they've got PhDs. A lot of this, hardcore training that, and the other half, but so they've got the tools, but they've had, a lot of them have had some degree of spiritual awakening experience, but find it difficult to accept and have these kind of fears and worries about what happens if they go public. And the other half of my students are, they lack some of the therapeutic tools, but they have really vivid personal spiritual awakening experiences, or spiritual healers, energy healers, Reiki, all sorts of alternative therapy. So they're used to working with clients as well, but maybe in a less verbal or therapeutic type of a way. And so it's bringing together both of those. And so, yeah, and so there are sort of two problems if you want to be a past life therapist or a hypnotherapist. One is that you don't have a clinical background. The other is that you do. So a lot of our past lives tell us these stories. So I've had, those kind of backgrounds as well. And it's reminding yourself, about all the abilities that you've had, and also overcoming whatever blocks that you had in the past that leave you with these residues that make you think it's difficult. And so even as you were saying about, these things about you can have like past fears, and like sometimes there are things we should be afraid of. And so like don't have regrets, go and do it, but do examine, maybe I needed a bit more pain, and maybe all that fear, part of it, I need to overcome my fears, but I also need to be able to listen to it and separate a bit. So it's not like I don't have any fear. It's I continue to have that emotional warning system. So again, it's like fear can be like a pain. Like you put your hand on a stove, you want to feel that pain. And the goal isn't not to have any fear, not to feel pain. It's to be able to feel it just for long enough to get the message and take the appropriate next action. So there's nothing then good or bad about fire or pain, really. If it's happening, it's happening for a reason. And oftentimes if we're dilly-dallying and are slow to get the message, the message might get ramped up. The universe can whisper to you the answer, and if you listen and take action, great. But if you don't, it might scream at you one day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it really is a macro of a micro. And, that
Yeah.
emanates through the body. And, generally speaking, the origins of all discontent starts to transmute through the physical body. That's kind of like how you get the warning signs that are necessary to now put everything back
Yeah.
together and become whole once more.
Yeah, actually, I had one of the case studies in the book. A client, she was a psychologist, and she was wanting to do past life regression, but was afraid of. So I got a psychiatrist and a psychologist. The psychologist, she'd had a natural connection with Tibetan with Buddhist teachers. She's actually born in Mongolia, and is a professor and practicing psychologist in Japan. But she remembered a past life where she was in Tibet, a Tibetan Buddhist monk, and she recalled a specific moment where an invading army came in and killed her students in front of her. And she went from sitting there in a hypnotic state to just screaming and hyperventilating, abreacting, and felt a great, a pain and a terror. But we just sat with it matter of factly. What happened next? What happened next? And it turned out she was able to make it into India and sat in meditation for years, trying to digest what does this mean, what happened, trying to overcome bitterness, anger, sadness, despair. And she realized she'd been teaching impermanence, but kind of a bit intellectually. And she understood, well, I've had a pretty vivid real life example of things are impermanent. And she went on and she could have become very disillusioned, but she sat so long in meditation, she ended up like damaging and creating like physical pain in her knees as well. But when she finally got up, she went on and continued to teach again, you know, and sort of faced that pain. It's like, I don't want to be a teacher. Being a teacher was such a joy. I loved my students, but then it gave me the greatest pain that I could imagine. And she learned through her meditation, she was able to understand impermanence, and meditation was able to deepen. And then, as we do in past lives, we took her to her past death, and she experienced seeing the students that had been killed in spirit, saying, "Congratulations, you passed the test." You know, and in that she felt, I feel no complete, even beyond transcending forgiveness. All of us were all just appeared to be separate, but we're all part of a spiritual lesson of helping us really understand impermanence. So to those that killed my students, I have nothing but love and compassion and appreciation, that that's all part of us learning what we needed to do, deepening our practice. And so she went from tears of pain at recalling that traumatic event to tears of joy in transcending the idea of trauma in itself, and and felt a loving compassion for, you know, her near and dearest students, but even for the quote unquote enemy, nothing but love and compassion, and the dissolution of the idea that there is self and other or good or bad, but we're all, things are just happening, lessons are being learned, and transcendence, and it's leading us towards transcendence, and that's something that she felt. And but she'd been carrying even this wound of this knee, and as some sort of like phantom pain in her life. And after those sessions, that pain went, but it was also the pain or the blockage of I have really conflicted feelings about I want to teach people spiritual things, but I also don't, because in the past I really did, but it also caused me so much pain. And by understanding and resolving that, that she's been able to go on and do that practitioner work and be a teacher herself. So I mean, it sort of speaks to the, you know, the visceral level of, hardcore difficult events, and an ability to transcend that in a way which is sort of, that's one of the nice things about past life regression, which is, you know, you can, the death experience is something that you can recall. And even now, we're living this stage. It's almost like the stage in history we're in is one that does lend itself to complacency, because our lives and our generations have had a pretty nice run of it, you know, from our parents. But prior to that, you know, we were viscerally engaged in world wars, like pretty constantly. And that's the case for many countries, you know, to this day. But our generations in the Western world have had a pretty clear run of having not too many problems, you know, like, or gross ones. We're able to create our own subtle ones, and feel bad about that. But, you know, to be able to reconnect, and that's something as well that, you know, even going and living in a place like India does sort of wake you up, where, you know, we grumble about, you know, some things in the West, whereas, life is a bit tougher in some of these other countries, but also seeing, and so viscerally experiencing that in this life, I think is helpful for our understanding of, you know, the human experience, but also knowing, and connecting to a lot of the cultures and difficult experiences of humanity by going into past lives and seeing, you know, we have a visceral connection to it, and that helps us be more grateful and appreciative of the life that we've got, and therefore more compassionate, for the people around us, and just, you know, just grateful, and realizing what it is, which is just such a precious opportunity that we've got, and to not spend it in overthinking or being critical, or thinking about the things that we don't like, but just noticing the opportunities we've got and using them as much as we can. You know?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a good point, is the contrast between, east to west. It's pretty big. It's pretty, it's lifetimes apart. You know, I mean, people reference certain points in humanity of a human timeline that are relevant, and in the shadows of their mind and the history of time, most big events in the last 100 years would be referenced to like World War II and other sort of famine-like scenarios. Yet I will share with, you know, many people the absolute genocide that Mao put upon his people in the last 100 years as a dictator. And then like, who was that guy again? I mean, he consciously, for fun, murdered 60 million plus people of his own. How that is not in a test of time, yet people will reference other heinous crimes related to World War II, yet not understand that this is going on everywhere, man. And people don't really get it. And, you know, the reason I'm a little bit, my personality gets a little fired up about that is because many parts of Asia, specifically China, had eradicated a lot of teachers like myself to give people more insight to their own remembrance by erasing that belief system and that religion and that culture from existence. And that took place under his reign. He made a very conscious effort to throw out the old and embrace the new, as if the Western culture would have more insight than something that's consciously on paper 5,000 years old plus, and it's been operating seamlessly for that period of time, that you can just be like so delusional to think that, you know, something is in its infancy, like Western culture could embrace or enhance something so potent, so ancient, is a little delusional. And he found that to be so. When he really needed to get down to the crutch of things, he referred back to the ancient practices that were necessary to heal himself and some of his you know, cabinet members that were dealing with the, you know, things like cancer, things of that nature. It didn't come from any Western remedy. It was all ancient Eastern tradition that brought healing back. And so they kept several of you know, offerings as such, a few leftover Taoist teachers, just for that purpose of getting greater insight, going deeper into, you know, understanding, using the energetics, which is the most powerful pillar of Chinese medicine. Furthermore, it really is where everything derived. The understanding of the culture, Chinese culture landscape, came from a deeper nature of one of my teachers, the Yellow Emperor, where he had an intimate relationship with the universe. The wisdom of the universe set him forth on a journey that had him magnetized to the earth for 18 days and nights, and downloaded everything that we know within Taoist alchemy, and furthermore Chinese medicine, and all the things that are set forth within the culture now, paying for that infrastructure. And, you know, using a transcribed sort of system of, you know, pictographs and oracle bone reading, which was like one of the first, you know, offerings of evidence of being able to ledger and hold this stuff into some form that can be reflected on as they continue to move forward in developing what we know now as China. And, you know, it's interesting. It's always something. It's like I have a dance with that, with an instrument. I don't know whether you've ever heard of a shakuhachi, a flute, but its origins come back to China, yet it's a very popular Japanese flute, right? And most people are like, I don't even know what you're talking about. It's Japanese. It always has been. Throw it down, bro. And I'm like, well, I'm a little bit of a poo-hooer when it comes to stuff like that. So I like to have a healthy debate about the origins of the shakuhachi, because it's such a beautiful instrument, and it's very, very, very seductive once mastered, and that is a lifetime commitment to master that instrument. It's not something you pick up. You won't even be able to blow through it. It'll amount to nothing. You have to meld and mold yourself around that instrument to create anything of offering from that. And it's a mastered state. And I mean, I think my obsession really came back because as a young boy, I used to play a trumpet. So it made it really more natural for me to progress to an instrument like that and really embody it. And it's like, because someone pick it up and blow through and be like, where's the, attempt? It's like the $64,000 question. Attempt to create a note from this instrument, and it just doesn't go anywhere. I mean, I love that point that you brought with the past lives, and of course, you probably looked at your own through your own exploration. And for myself, I've gone back to thousands, acknowledging, this is just another version of myself, and I've done this many times over as a Taoist priest. But the last 9 needed to be a little bit more. And the reason we use 9 within a Taoist path of what we refer to, not as past life regression, we refer to it as soul retrieval. And that's kind of like a way of capturing a deeper nature of what you're experiencing in this present, iteration. This is what you are getting out of it. And so, examples, I was a Catholic priest, I was a Christian pastor, I was a Buddhist monk. I actually at one point sat in a state of complete surrender, and my death story was simple. I was surrounded. I had all my peers surround me in a ceremony where I was basically in the center of a bonfire, and they set me on fire as I then liberated myself and went to the next level. And that type of stuff is potent when you feel it. It's like when I say it, you feel what I'm talking about. This is not a diluted state. You like, holy crap. And, the Catholic priest, had a binge one night in a local bar, and someone slit my throat on the way back to the church. You have these moments, and in this life, as a priest, I've met that tactile response of the body into the present moment, and not just from the physicality of bodybuilding or powerlifting, but I've met it. I've had people draw firearms on me point blank. I had dozens of situations where people pull knives on me, and there's a surrender that comes with that, where you have no control over what the outcome is. And you're looking at this and you're like, how did I end up? I'm a priest. How am I in the presence of someone who's literally a self-proclaimed serial killer or murderer? And I've come across them many times. It's part of the technique for interacting with energies is we always look into the left eye. Now you can understand the neurological aspect of left eye, right eye, left brain, right brain, the connection of the two, that your interplay between intention, attention, intellect, intuitive states, they all cross section. And we could get down to the boring state of neurocoupling and all that kind of nonsense. But the truth is, as a Taoist practitioner, you look into the left eye to go deep into the soul, and then you find many different things. And in most cases, I find this enchanted sort of story that comes out of that person, of past lives and presently what they're contributing to their own experience. And it's very visceral, it's very vivid, and it happens instantaneous. But once again, a conditioning. This is a cultivational practice, but many times I've looked into that left eye and quite frankly wish I didn't, because I've come across murderers and serial killers, rapists, and they know, I see you, you see me. And that's where you get real sober, real fast as to what's going on. And so there's so much potency to this ability. What do you, because you've been on this path or you've been exposed to, I wouldn't say you're on this path, so I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've had some type of inclination or some affection towards a Buddhist culture or Hindu culture. I don't know how much you continue using that in your own personal life now. What is the relationship? You speak about past life regression. Every time I talk about that, I have to literally pound out and put out the incessant nagging of this character by the name of Dolores Cannon, who constantly comes because I leave the lights on. So I get these entities that are having conversation with me. And this is fun because I'm referencing the 80s, you know, Crockett and Tubbs. I'm not 3 cents short of $1, and I didn't leave my groceries at the meat market. The truth be known, when you access that state of awareness, it's like unlocking your unconscious, right? So, you know, for you, terminology would be similar to understanding the ideomotor response. Furthermore, within remote viewing, which a lot of my friends love to teach, and I teach it once in a while, it's kind of fun, but I mean, it's a title. Ideograms are the sort of like messaging that give you a connection of where the information is coming from, how you're able to create something. And so this sort of spark of divinity would come from, you know, what I refer to as body dowsing, and I train people in that, but most people would refer to that as a form of emanation from the body that can give messaging in this now moment. It's like, so when you, so say, for example, you help someone or give them the pathway to instant hypnotic state of awareness, something so deep that can go right down to beyond an epsilon threshold, maybe that would be refined as a somnambulistic state. You have access to everything at once. It's like the now moment. And so when you get into these sort of states, you go, okay, what is that? How is that relevant to me and the experience? By helping people find their path, how is that enriching and nourishing your own spiritual perception? How does that work for you?
Yeah, it's a complex but a great question, a lot of parts, because so the now moment is important. So even when we talk about, you know, what is hypnosis, and we have these ideas that may be generated from basically the 1950s, 60s, or 70s. And we think this is what people think of when they think of this. Well, for 10,000 years, they didn't think of that because it didn't exist, but hypnosis existed. Therefore, it had its own thing. And 20 years from now, the next generation will have not known these stereotypes and won't think of that either. So it's just really a blip. And then but there is a degree of lineage. So for me, I read the books of Brian Weiss and connected with those particularly, Many Lives, Many Masters, Same Soul, Many Bodies. And so, or Michael Newton or William J. Baldwin. So they're the big three for me: past life regression, between lives, and spirit release. And I feel they're kind of part of my lineage as a therapist. Dolores Cannon, I know her work. A lot of my clients or my advanced students have studied with her and connect with her. I personally don't have a karmic connection to her, so I don't know a lot about her work or what she does. And really, I love Brian Weiss's books and read every word multiple times. I just find Dolores, for me personally, unreadable, and because I just don't connect with her. And so it all comes down to the karmic connection. And then it's also remembering that, you know, Dolores passed away in 2016. And everybody is just arising and passing away. And
Her answer is 2014. I'm like, really? I thought
or was it?
No, that's what she
Okay.
said. She's an irritating
Okay.
avatar, to be quite frank. You know, I tell her that,
Yeah.
look, you can have a box to stand on, and this might be a soapbox, but I'm not going to peddle whatever it is that you. When I have these dialogues, I go and do
Okay.
I'm a little skeptic, so I'd like to do my own research, and she is incessant. I mean, it's to a fault. She complains that people are not applying her techniques to their extreme, where they're like the constant is now, oh, well, you don't need to go that deep because, you know, it's the consciousness collective that has brought it up higher. So people don't have to go as deep into this state. And she's like, nonsense. You're not practicing how I taught it. I'm like, another story altogether, got her own conflicts. But I found it most interesting was because everyone, and I've had quite a few, dozens of her practitioners on my podcast, and everyone was like, oh, she won't come back from the spirit world and have any contact with anybody. Every time I explain my connection with her, they're like, that's her. I'm like, well, what about this whole thing about she's not coming back? Because if someone can just evacuate my place and keep her out, that would be awesome, because it just doesn't.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, like we do need leaders and writers in the field, and there have been, and we all have the ones that we resonate with the most. But it is still an ongoing evolution and process. And so for me, and it's also something that we take as our responsibility to, we have to learn from those that came before us, but we eventually do have to step into the role of expressing really clearly what our message and what our understanding is, and hopefully moving it forward, and knowing that that eventually takes precedence to a degree. So a lot of people are followers of a certain one thing or another. But even within the Dharmic traditions, a lot of them are very much like, the Buddha was our originator, but these other avatars and people and they really revere them, and like the Buddha was, his time is then, but now we've taken it the next thing. And so there's a universal foundation of how it's done, but then the specifics of, you should be doing it this way or that way, then you're getting into details. And I think it's useful and there are things that resonate with some people and not others. So everyone's got their own tribe, and then everyone needs their own leader or practitioner or person who just says, like, this is the way as I see it. And so a lot of people who come on my trainings will say, I really liked Dolores and she helped me get to this level. But now that I'm here, I see there are other things that I want to do, and I resonate with the way that you're communicating it. So I want to continue my studies with you. I mean, but it's also literally, I mean, if Dolores was here, maybe they would go with her. But, this is the fact of life. People get old and die, and new people come along, you know? And so I'm just one of those new people, and that's just how it goes. And we can cling to those, but eventually, they go into the mist of time. But yeah, it really is as well. Everyone's got their own karmic connection to their own thing. So for me, and I have a karmic connection really specifically to that Buddhist lineage as well. So a lot of my past lives are in Buddhist traditions, and a lot of my own clients or students have that a similar background, and and it's also, and so do their clients. So it's whether you even want it or not. And so they might like Dolores might say this or that doesn't happen or can't happen or shouldn't happen, and then they go, but in my experience with my clients, it is happening, and I need to know how to deal with it. And you're saying that it's wrong or that it doesn't happen or that clients don't do this, but I've seen 10 clients who just did, and I will say, well, I actually think it does happen, and here's how to deal with it. And so they, well, that's good. I'm glad there's somebody. And so there's still no right or wrong. It's just some people need her trainings and should not come to me, and other people can do both, or other people don't need to go to her and can talk to me about, whatever it is. And so that's also as well. So for me, even with Brian Weiss, he's absolutely a lineage holder, I would say, and the person that inspired me the most and his books. And so that's why but he omits some things. And so in my book, I've got 7 case studies, 3.5 of which are sort of conventionally orientated regressions to this life and past lives, but past lives and other planets or in other dimensional states, and between lives, getting into the soul contracts that we make. But I do then add in the second half of the book the fact that while you're doing past life regression and dealing with soul councils and spirit guides and soul groups, don't be surprised if you meet earthbound spirits and dark force entities and ETs. So, and then if that happens, how do you deal with it? Or how do you not freak out and think, this is weird or something's wrong? And so I really sort of define this is the kind of thing that can happen, and then here are some ways to deal with it, according to me. And that it all comes back to karmic connection. If people don't need to find or my work or books, they won't, and they don't know I exist. But for the people that do, then there's a part where, oh, good, this is kind of what I was looking for, because somebody got me this far down the road, but actually what I needed was this next step. And so it is interesting to me, like people like Brian Weiss don't mention some of those things, and they may do that really strategically in a way that I'd understand, because they've got a particular message which they need to go on Oprah and share about past lives. But now he's 80, and and that's all the culture could handle at that time. But things have changed, and Dolores came along and started talking about ETs and less mainstream penetration, but still useful, or resonated with a lot of people anyway. And then, so the next phase, and dealing with like dark entities. And that's something where hard to penetrate bigger. Like if Brian Weiss had said all of that at the same time, he would have not been able to spread his main message. And then even the question is why some people don't write about their experiences with other aspects that are implicit in regression, according to me. But that's because I've got a karmic connection to it, and the universe will bring me clients, and those clients will express that. Then I'll just document it, and like a journalist say, this is what I experienced. But I also know that I've done it 5,000 times plus with people, and I know that 20% of the time this can happen. But I've also got clients my students that I mentor through their own sessions. So I've got hundreds of students who've done thousands of sessions with their clients. So I've just built up a data set, which is there's a certain percentage of people who need to hear this message or need to know that this can happen and need to know that there's a therapeutic modality that can help work through it. And so therefore, just that awareness and peace and insight that they can have means that as their state of being can be, the universe knows that and thinks this client has this problem. I will allow that to come up in the session because I know that this therapist has been exposed to it, will be able to deal from it, and it might be a bit jolting or jarring or shocking for them, but that will be part of a learning process, and they will be able to help people with issues. And they might even stop smoking session 30 years ago, didn't come up. Then 10 years later, they go for a past life session. Now they've had a spirit attachment for 30 years. They weren't ready to face it. Now's the time. It's become a bit more aware in the popular consciousness, some of these issues and it really is peeling off layers. And so we peel off the layers of gross suffering in the West, but we still have these layers of minor suffering. But if that's the biggest suffering you know, then it's the biggest suffering that you know. But as we peel that off and we start to realize, well, what behind, I had no problems whatsoever, except this little existential thing of, isn't there a bit more than what we're being told? Is there some real gold somewhere or this glittering artifice? And then you start to notice some of these real subtle layers and start to heal them. Once we've done that, then we can, be done. But so to me, it's a generational progression that happens, you know. And so all these guys in the 70s, yeah, all these guys in the 70s fooling around with NLP, I think was all part of it. But yeah, I mean, is it how I do it? No, but it's all still, it's all still kind of part of the fun of it, It was a bit rough and ready, and, we can't keep doing it like that. But, they were doing the best they could with what they knew. And, yeah, it's, hopefully we keep going, refining it, defining it, refining it. And yeah, I think so I'm ultimately an optimist that, the light wins in the end, and that no matter what's happening, good or bad, it's all just part of this crazy, magical, beautiful, mysterious journey. And I feel that we can't success is guaranteed. We all make it in the end. It's just a matter of time, and time is a sort of a bit slightly illusionary thing. Like it may all be quite complete and perfect right now, you know. And so and you can have that feeling in this moment, even as we keep trudging through time, but with a bit of a lightness and sort of fun on the journey, regardless of all the the dark and shadow.
Yeah, I mean, you make such a good point because trance is a state of awareness, and you're attuning yourself to something outside of what is your version of reality. It's greater than what's within the story. So it's just like you're turning your dial up to acquire a greater bandwidth of what's potential, what's possible. And so, I always go with, you know what you know, you don't know what you don't know. That is your truth as you know it now. What the hell are you talking about? My truth as I know it now. This is where we lie. Because, whenever I do street magic, it's a matter of just walking up to someone, I'm transmitting a resonance. And so when it's something as sort of entertainment value as walking up to someone in the street that's already in a party mode, who's at the front of the Bellagio Hotel, had a couple of drinks, and they're just walking around entertaining themselves, and someone like myself approaches them and says, would you like to experience bliss? And they're like, yeah. Oh yeah. And I'm to be frank, it's like, okay, so this is a state of awareness. You might refer to it as something else, but let me give you a sample of it and you can determine what that is. And so the friend gets the camera out and they're videotaping it, and you can already see the evidence of the trance setting in. The eyes are starting to glaze, the chest is starting to basically the compression of the breath and the rash that's entering into the chest area as you are tuning yourself. Now, for me, all I'm doing is resonating a frequency. And so I have them at hello. Their admission is part of my entry into their world. I don't consciously do that to manipulate, but it's very possible. That's what you can do. It's very simple to do. I'm not a fan of it, but just entering that resonance. So for someone to define it as hypnosis is a very, very limited perspective of what this means. And I mean, furthermore, it had its other iteration of mesmerism, which was coined by some other version of a trance teacher back in the 1800s. I think his name was John Mesmer or something like that. We're just using different titles of our ability to become aware and access something that wouldn't be possible had you not been able to hold this state. And so when you walk up to someone and they get their camera out and their friend's like, yeah, I want to feel bliss. And just by me transmitting, they just fall into a sleep and standing state without any words. And then I'm like, okay, so the end result is your friend wants to feel bliss. They've given us that permission, and they're videotaping it. And their friend's like, you didn't do anything. Why is he standing up with his head down and he's just like, he looks like he's floating? Oh, he's listening to what we're saying. And now I'm going to create a different persona. And they're like, what are you talking about? Well, I'm Justin Bieber. And they're like, what? And, you know, more technical term, most people will refer to this as a reverse hallucination. I like it as a level of shape shifting, because you can do this consciously if you have the ability to transmit at that resonance. People will see and not see things at will. It depends on what you're putting out and what other people are receiving. And so when this person wakes up and they forget their name and I'm Justin Bieber and they want a photo, instantaneously within a 60-second cycle. We're not talking about a build up or a priming or a fractionated state that most hypnotists will use as terminology to acquire this state. It's happening as a transmission. The union that you and I are having is a robust, expansive energy. We're both bathing in this emanated state right now and have been through the whole conversation. And the more we come closer to our own absolute truth, the higher the resonance is and the more expansive the energy. And it just says this symbiosis, this dance that goes back and forth. We're feeling it constantly. And, you know, when you witness something like that, you go, how is that possible? And then when they return to what is considered their normal state of awareness, and they don't know, it's like, okay, so when are we starting? And their friend's like, oh, and they are committed to asking, when are we starting? And the friend's like, what do you mean, when are we starting? We already started and you finished. What are you talking about? And, you know, these are shifts of awareness that you can integrate into their bandwidth instantaneously with intention. When you are cultivating enough of this ability to transmit it as a default. And that's where, you know, fallen, you know, manipulators like most failed students of like NLP, most of the political landscape these days are wannabe NLPers that are attempting to manipulate the audience or a group think scenario. And, you know, and that's the fundamental, in my opinion, the issue is you're looking to manipulate an outcome instead of for the greater good and the wholeness of the collective. You're looking for a fractionated little manipulative myopic outcome for thyself. And it sounds a little sort of fantasy land for a lot of people, but that truly is the default for any Taoist alchemist, is to return to servitude and selflessness that does not require your participation.
Yeah. I mean, well, as you're saying that, I'm thinking like for the student, hypnosis is something they're trying to do. For the master, your being is hypnotic.
Yeah.
Right? And for the person who's trying to get other people against the flow. But if you're a master, you are the flow, you're one with the flow, and then the flow is working and flowing through you. And what you want is what the universe wants, therefore, so be it. And you're not trying to do something which is against something, you're just totally in flow with what is. And you're bringing people into that by your presence. And they're completely different things. So that word hypnosis is something that a lesser person trying to do, or a person with the wrong motivation and understanding, or for the master, hypnosis is the most beautiful thing. For someone who's not, it can be ugly.
Well, it just shows someone their own power. For me,
Mm,
when they're experiencing something like that, and I'm the concierge of their experience of their true power. How can you go from, oh, I was kind of a little irritated, got out of my hotel room, was fighting with my girlfriend, got down on the strip, had a couple of shots, I got a little buzz, and then all of a sudden I meet this guy, and I feel like I've had 9 pina coladas, 10 days in the Bahamas, and a full body massage for 3 days straight. How is that possible? Because you are powerful, you are potent, you are eternal, forever, immortal. And
mm,
that's a deeper, path of awareness for a lot of people. For you and I, we can understand this universal language, but that to me is the truth. That's
mm.
my absolute truth.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, these are all tools in a way. So I think some people use hypnosis as if it's sort of some sort of bicycle, and other people use it and take you for a spin in their Ferrari. So there are levels. There are some hypnotists who are, giving you a ride on the back of their rickety old bike. But if you know what you're doing, you give someone a real ride they'll never forget in a Ferrari, and that's both a method of transportation, but there are levels.
Yeah, and it's kind of like conditioning. It's like, well, how was I able to experience that? And then you sit with their finite mind a few seconds after that, because they want to understand it as everything falls back into place. And they're like, I remember that. I had a moment where I was completely drunk and I thought the world was collapsing in on me. Now I woke up the next day and remember all the things that I did. And so all of a sudden, how can I obtain this ability or this state of awareness where I literally am just blissed out of my mind? Well, that's the power of you. You can live like this 24/7. It's not the old expression, have your cake and eat it, but it is. That's the paradox. You can have your cake and eat it, but it doesn't require your participation. And they're like, oh, wow, where do I go from here? But you understand exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, oh, I love that. Actually, Thailand is, like Vegas is sort of known as City of Sin, and Thailand has a certain reputation. There are certain cities as well, which I've lived in. One of them, they call the City of Sin of Thailand. But it's the funny thing, as you're talking about that, like all these sort of lazy characterizations we have, that where you go, there's heaven. And so you're out there amongst this whole realm of, it is distorted by that whole tourism and the whole thing. And it's the same in Thailand, but it's like wherever you go, you are creating the environment. You're not the environment isn't dictating to you. You're overwhelming it and just bringing your heaven, peace, bliss, even in the most extreme situation. I kind of love that.
Mm.
It's even sometimes people say, "What are you doing living in that part of Thailand for?" It's like, like it's this or that. No, it's not. It's heaven. There's no city of sin part of it. It's heaven. It's a heaven realm. Because if you've got an idea of heaven, that's a good place and that's a bad place. No, it's not. Don't work like that, brother.
Right. I mean, people are victim to their own perception. They're victim to a limited state only because you know what you know, you don't know what you don't know, and that's
Yeah.
what we continually return to when you start recognizing that when you truly want to access yourself, you have to surrender to the fact you know nothing.
Amen.
Yeah, yeah. It's so exciting and refreshing to have a conversation with incredible beings like yourself, because it's not in any way distorted. but there's that level of mastery is something that is so ancient, and it needs to be remembered more and more and more. And I think a lot of people, they get this whole poo-hooing. So, we were talking about states of psyche, 30 years ago, and you referenced the Lawrence and ETs and things of that nature. 30 years ago, as a priest, when someone would come to me with a psychotic break and confess that they're just unhinged in reality, and some doctors telling them that they are diagnosed with a specific state of mind or lack of, and then I give them the keys to a liberating moment of dominion where the incessant noise in their head disappears as they return to their true self. And furthermore, at a more ancient ritualistic nature, it was considering within the ordinance of my lineage, it's referred to as an exorcism, right? You're exercising this energy. It's very ancient, but all I'm doing is helping you reclaim and liberate what's yours and return it back to you. Yet today, in probably the last 10 years, whenever I'm experiencing an event with anybody, I always look into their auric field and love to look around and see what's holding up the foundation of their truth. And then when they're like literally out of nowhere, and I'm like, oh, I really enjoy your relationship with JC. I hang out with that homie quite often when he's present within someone else's path. And they're like, how do you know anything about Jesus Christ? I'm like, it seems to be something that you're very fond of, and he seems to be constantly repeating himself through your own emanated state. How do you, what, I just see it. It's like, you can see that? Oh, absolutely. It's a conditioning. It's a developed state of awareness. That's all. Anyone can learn these skills, but most people don't have the methods or are given the methods to do as such. So, when it comes to today, last 10 years, I see a lot more of this collective. It's more like a group think. And I see more aliens in people's auras. 30 years ago, I wouldn't have seen that. I'm not having these events where I'm connecting with aliens. I do connect with spirits, but they never came in that form. It's an interesting sort of cycle where all of a sudden you see all these entities, and they're very fundamental to the awakening of the individual. But it wasn't until the last 10 years, and now they're popping up in every auric field that I look at. There is an evidence of this alien presence. And it's, that's neither good or bad. It's just, you say tomato, I say tomato. It's part of your experience, and that's what you're gravitating to. I always tell people there is an infinite amount of spirits and entities and energy. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I can give you an experience with something that could be just crafted and created in the demented, dark shadows of Wes Craven's mind. And he titles that Freddy Krueger. That may be some fictional character in an experience that you're having. But the truth be known, that is as tangible as you want it to be. You think you're having this, oh, I'm afraid, oh my goodness, this entity is it's of your making. And so you refer to it as a karmic model. They are crafting their own reality, and they're starting to gravitate to this resonance that is being formed with a thought, feeling, and emotion. And now you have a cluster of very clear distortion that you can return to at will and relive that same experience. And then you start having an intimate relationship with this. And all of a sudden now it's bigger and larger than life. And it was just some stupid character in some movie that I watched because I thought it was really cool when I was a kid. I like to get scared. Well, it's all messaging of a bigger picture. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, ultimately, as we bring up, even we talk about like City of Sin and like on this earthly realm, and even when you're talking about like these tough guys pulling guns on you and stuff, like this is a rough and tumble world, and Earth. It has been for the last 10,000 years. It's pretty brutal, and we came here to be in this violently dualistic world, and to bring in our peace and compassion and understanding. But it's great for learning. And so that's at a physical level. And so as we start talking about entities, dark forces, ETs. Ultimately, like I said, ultimately in the end, we win, and maybe that there is no end or beginning in time. And so as you get into it, I think as you get into some of the greater truths, you find out there is an infinity of spirits, entities, and energies, and a lot of light and a lot of really scary dark. But it's then under getting over the scare, seeing it. There is the black and white of the, but the black is not something to be afraid of. It's something to understand. And as you learn from it, you can go to it. So don't avoid it. Don't be afraid of it. Uh, Learn what you need to learn to be able to deal with it. But that's part of what I help people to do, even like facing past life deaths or facing very aggressive dark energies that will yell, swear, threaten, attack. It's just going to it, going through it, and getting beyond it. Because beyond it, ultimately, there is ultimately nothing to be afraid of, but there are a lot of things that could scare us. But it's that journey that we need to go through to transcend the ability to be scared of anything at any time, even though there's all of this dark stuff going on. And yeah, and so then getting onto ETs, that is also, I was initiated into it in some of my earlier experiences. And I saw it a little bit in my clients in the earlier days, but that was part of just because I had to be initiated to know what it was. And it was always there a little bit, but I've seen exactly the same thing over the last 10 and certainly the last 5 years. Big uptick in people recalling past lives as in other planets, as the various species of ETs, and in having attachments, devices put into them, or interaction with non-dimensional beings. And they may be living on other planets or in other ships. They may have psychic devices in which they're monitoring, doing experiments, or they may be non-dimensional beings beyond our ability to really understand what a being is, but they may not be particularly reliant on a body or a spaceship to get to us and interact. And so that's definitely something that I'm seeing ticking up. And so that's why and that's not what you won't find that in the books of Brian Weiss, not even too much really in Michael Newton, but these guys, again, Brian Weiss is still alive, but he's late 70s. Michael Newton passed away, 8, 10 years ago. So, as did Dolores. But it's like, it's now bringing in, and even people might even see like Dolores isn't conventionally trained. She's not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, which Brian Weiss and Michael Newton are. So she might then be being a bit left field. But people who are, I think that is going to become more mainstream. But it's also, maybe tweaking a little bit the understanding of the way that you work with it. But yeah, that's absolutely something that I'm seeing coming up more. And so that's why I definitely wanted to include those kind of case studies in my book, which is a little, not exactly completely unusual in the field of past life regression, but it's definitely something I had to include, and it's coming up more and more. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes sort of, as I referred to, 30 years ago, exorcisms were very normal
Mm.
for me. And then I will have a fire sale, or I won't see anything for like 10 years, and then I'll have a fire sale. I'll be like, I'll mention that word, and next minute I'll get 40 people that are having distorted events that need to be returned back to whole using certain methods to exercise what that energy is and what that means to them. And it goes deeper into layers that are
Yeah.
definitely bigger than the life that they're living in.
Absolutely. Speaking of movie reviews, I did a movie review on my YouTube channel of The Exorcist, because again, it's one of those things that shapes the culture and what people think of when they think of exorcism. And I break down what is literally real, and what is a movie fabrication, or what is my opinion of like, what do I see in clinical practice. And so you could call it exorcism. I call it releasing dark force entities,
Mhm.
but a Catholic could easily call it an exorcism.
Well,
But yeah,
I mean, that's a common term. One of my lineages,
sure.
the original leader that channeled Latsu and then created the monastery that I was ordained in, his expertise was exorcisms. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's not specifically coined to Catholicism, but it's a general understanding when you meet the spirit world with the material.
Well, the jinns, every culture, has got some sort of dark entity that, and being cast out. Absolutely. So yeah, it's a universal experience, sort of around the world for millennia, and yeah, and so it is something that, but it was kind of excommunicated from the doctrine of conventional modern therapy. It was dismissed by the Enlightenment of rationalism, which is we had to cast away a lot of superstitions, but we cast away a few things that are circling back as, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater. And we threw out the baby of a lot of spiritual understanding with the bathwater of sort of silly superstitions. And I think we're sort of saying, well, we threw a lot away. We have to bring back some of the stuff we threw away prematurely, or, you see what happens when you throw away some of that, too much of it, or you throw away, so that's something that I wanted to bring back or emphasize as, that is something I absolutely see. People have dark attachments that are negatively affecting them, and they may have picked that up in past lives, and so like, what's the root cause of that attachment? And so for me, it's actually doing that spirit release. Sometimes people only want to do past lives and they don't even want to get involved in this, and but and that's fine, because sometimes, like, they're not confident to do it, but they're also not competent to do it. So they shouldn't. So that fear that they have and that lack of confidence is completely correct and justified. But maybe 10 years from now, as they build up their confidence and competence in being able to regress anything and anyone, and dealing with difficult clients and difficult situations and really hardcore traumas, then they become more able to deal matter of factly with anything. And then when they get a challenging spirit releasement case, it becomes something that tests them, challenges them, pushes them beyond their limits, that extends them. And so for me, some of these cases can be the most difficult ones, but therefore also kind of the most fun. Because after a while, doing past life regression, like thousands of times, like almost boring in a way. And you're sort of looking for, like, I want to, so I don't even do, if someone says I want one session to find out who I was, I won't do it because it's too boring. I say you must have a deep pain that you need to fix, because that way it gives me something to actually do. I'm not here to hold your hand on a tourism thing. I want to get some really hardcore healing that I have to really think and be focused and do some really intelligent, sophisticated, brilliant work. And I can't do that if you're not bringing me anything meaty. And then spirit releasement is just another way of doing that, where it's like really challenging and hardcore and difficult, and but once you get the hang of it, I mean, it's amazing. It's kind of part of the pinnacle of it. And so when I share these case studies in the book, I hope people sort of see, oh wow, that was really scary and I wouldn't want to deal with that. But when they see the beginning, the middle, the end, they go, oh, okay, there is a way you can do it. And that was sort of clever and that works. And okay, I think maybe I could do it. And now there are a lot of people who've got problems in the, in the background that are able to be helped. So I think there is a lot of, darkness sneaking around and whispering in people's ears. And the more people that are willing and able to address that, the better, you know. And in the end, it is sort of fun, you know.
Oh, it's a lot of fun. I mean, I remember distinctly the look on my mother's face when I invited her to a channeling class probably 25 years ago. I was at about 20 or 30 students, and I invited her to a channeling class, and oh, she got a comeuppance, because what you're experiencing when you unravel something that has, as you put it, an attachment. And specifically, I'd always have one student absorbing and channeling source, and the other one taking notes and asking questions. And so it was a nice little coupling. And I started to realize that that particular student that looked sort of benign, sounded benevolent, but I could see a lot of things forming in their field that were not the same messaging from what you could see at face value. And so I just moved the student aside, and then I started asking questions to the source information through my other student. And all of a sudden it hit a switch. It went from beautiful rainbows and bliss to a very dark, malevolent sort of state. And, at that point, I'd already prepared myself to circumvent and exercise that energy. Now, what took place after that was mind-blowing to everyone in the class. And furthermore, I'll get to the point of what my mother's reaction was when the woman literally flipped upside down, swirled around, and threw herself across the room from that exercise state. And my mother went, "What the fuck? This shit is real." And I'm like, "She doesn't swear." Because this is really what's going on. It's energy, frequency, vibration. And understand that it can come in all different forms. And you, as your Sherlock to your Watson, you are following the trail back to the origin of what that is, whether it stays within the body, but is a hub from a past stream of your emanated state, and you follow that back, you will find where the end thread is, and you can either tie it back on or you can cut it. And that's where things start to, exorcisms that I've conditioned people through and out of as a healing tool over all my years is very much like out of the movies, outside of like them contorting into a demonic physical transformed state. I can see it within the ether, I can see it within their spirit state, but their body will respond as such. It's an unraveling. And it's like people freak out and go, that is out of that's crazy. What about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying that, a lot of it is true. Even when I critique The Exorcist, I mean, there are some things that are physically impossible, but even then, I've seen people, like they've never been able to go into full lotus, and then it'll say, and then they'll put a spirit will put them into full lotus, and you go, so that's not physically impossible, but it's like I know they haven't done it, and that's enough to get their attention. It's different to their head spinning around. They haven't seen that, but metaphorically it is, and that's just a visual representation of what is happening on the inside, which it is a head spinning type phenomenon. And it just makes me think of, you're doing the street magic, bringing this bliss, and you are one with the way. And then when people are doing this kind of work, or even when it comes up, it is that bringing that state of being, so that bliss becomes an antidote to whatever opposite it may be. And so that these kind of forces, if you're able to bring them to people that, and you know what, even with the right techniques, people who are at a moderate level can do a pretty good job with pretty advanced or difficult things. But ultimately, sometimes the more severe the problem, the case you're describing is at that top level. It requires a top level practitioner, but they magically tend to find their match. But the experience is, if you've had this kind of spontaneous experience, and for people that felt it was a bit much for me, I would say get training to figure out how it can be, or just use that as an impetus to develop yourself so that it's not. And so once you get to your level, there is nothing that is too much for you,
Fearlessness,
because
it has to be, you have to be fearless. It cannot
you've
come into an equation. If you even think
exactly,
even outside of that, you're gone.
yeah,
You will literally
exactly.
be the reverse effects of that, and you will embody it, and it will corrupt you, and you will physically diminish. I mean, it's
Yep,
that
it'll
potent at that level.
absolutely. They prey on you. And it's even like with a dog, an animal or a dog or something, a horse or a dog. If they sniff fear within you, you look like you're sort of like yelling or shouting, or like the Christ compels you, but you're inside of you. There's some fear or doubt. They'll just feast on that, and you're going to have trouble. And so it becomes fun when you face that extreme level and know that you're unshakable,
Yeah.
and that can take some you can't kind of, a lot of time you can fake it till you make it with a lot of stuff, but with this one it does require that training. But to me, like, ultimately there are people, masters, who can deal with anything that can arise. So that can be one question. What about there may be various levels of dark entities, but what about like the ultimate? Isn't there something that even you might be afraid of? But like in 28 years of being exposed to these phenomenon and 20 years as a clinician, like, my perspective is there is nothing greater than a human who is advanced to a high level.
Yeah.
Therefore, nothing ultimately to be afraid of. No ultimate thing that, and Yeah. And so, I mean, do you, but, and there are people who, you know, it almost becomes sort of a religious belief system, but I mean, what do you think? Do you
Well,
think
yeah,
that's
I mean,
true or?
you can't. For me, having done this over 30 years, there's no in between. One of the first events I
Yeah.
ever had was, you know, I came became very comfortable in this whole cycle of things, and you know, a distant healing for me over 30 years ago was very normal. So it's not like I have to
Mm.
stand around waving my hands and calling in spirits and angels and whatnot. It was a
Yeah.
flow that I already transmitted. And so I could just be literally asleep in the corner of the room and someone is laying on a table having an experience of their lifetime, because all I am is a catalyst for the source of what the truth is. And so this particular event, I remember quite clearly, this woman is laying on the table and we're like, okay, let's turn the lights out so you can have, basically, I just wanted to have a nap because I spent the whole day. I was like, let's just turn the lights out and you lay down and I'll do the energy and everything will be great. So I'm in the corner of the room asleep, basically. And then something caught my eye and she's having a full blown visceral experience as my teacher Latsu was performing the exercises on her from a higher realm. Now, this is a very advanced training, but something
Yeah.
caught my eye. So we're in a pitch black room and light is now opening. And I look at it, I stand up and I start walking towards the light. And then this little girl comes out. And she starts walking towards me. And she's like, hi. And I'm like, hi. And this is in a pitch black room. Now, how do you put that? The client is completely in a state of healing and reconstructing everything as Latsu's running this energy through her and forming back what is distorted into whole. In that situation, I think she had a blown knee. So her connective tissue was repairing at will. In the end, she got up, no blown knee, no issue with connective tissue, 100% healed. This is not abnormal for me. I've been witnessing this stuff for so long. I should write a book on it. You know, the first experience I ever had was gangrenous flesh turning back to pink in color in 40 minutes before my very eyes. That was my entry level of remembrance. So Latsu is performing this healing, and I'm having a conversation with this, what seems to be an innocent young girl. And then it goes really deep. And all of a sudden, this energy turns into something really dark and malevolent and demonic and attempts to enter my body. But because I find all of this stuff almost childlike, I am childlike. I embrace that energy now. Never before have I ever had a dialogue with an entity like that that doesn't take more than maybe 30 seconds to 2 minutes, and they will return to where they came, because the entry level for completely sedating and returning an entity is a complete embrace, a wholeness that some may translate as love. It's a frequency. And when you return that energy to that entity, its purpose is no longer present and it is dissolved. It was commandeering the energy of this girl who lost her life in that house 30 years previously to the hand of her uncle. I mean, the whole story. And then so I'm turning the lights on. This client has a husband, and he comes into the room, and then we get a confession. And I'm like, well, what's the confession? Let me guess. I can see what's going on here. The two of you have been lured by an energy that's asked you to come into this particular kitchen, that you can feel the dampness, the darkness, and the prickling effects of this energy in this space. And it's like a glowing like state that is encapsulating and engulfing the kitchen. And they're like, oh yeah. And they looked at each other because they stayed in their own, they slept in separate bedrooms, even though they were married. And I'm like, so do we want to confess something now? I've got this energy attempting to enter my physical body as if it's going to possess me. That's never going to happen. I find it quite massaging. It's therapeutic. And the energy itself has a purpose. What is going on? They adopted a young girl who became their daughter. And every night they would hear her voice calling from the kitchen, and they would come out with no child. And then they were returned back to the bedroom and she was laying in her bed. And so this was going on for quite some time. And they finally confessed to each other, like, are you married or not? You're having these individual experiences, but you're so petrified, you don't want to have any conversation about what is going on. And so it was like a complete, like vomiting of confession. And I'm like, this entity is very tangible and real. It's taken possession of this space. It was commandeered by another energy that basically corrupted the person that took this girl's life through the means that I don't even want to describe. I've described it before, but it was a horrible state. So the girl was waiting for her parents to come back. I'm like, okay, your parents have come and gone, and now you're just in a loop. And quite frankly, when you separate the three demon entities, as you put it, attachments, she's just glowing, beautiful white light and returning to where she came from. The clients, though, had this sobering reality. I said, in many cases, when I experience this, it can be so deep that the foundation of this house may need to be restructured because they've laid so much groundwork in this space. It's so dense. If you've ever come across a scene, a murder scene or anything like that, you feel into that energy and you know it's palpable. I'll walk into a house and instantly the spirits will come and talk to me and go, I passed away in that room. And then this happened to me here. And I mean, we can go deeper and deeper into this, but this is where this stuff is so tangible. And the two, they ended up selling the house. They couldn't resolve it. And the end result was the best thing to do is let this go. And I spent 3 hours in negotiation with these entities because they had complete dominion over the girl. And then people are like, well, how is that possible? She's a spirit, but she's an earthbound spirit still being puppeteered by these energies. And what they turn into is a succubus. So she's a channel for absorbing and inverting energy within this space. And like all this stuff, as your body is speaking the language that I love, your aura is speaking the language I love, what I'm speaking is truth, and you know it to be true because you can feel it. And this is the part where, holy crap, this is a whole new world order. Yeah, well, this is their world and we're living in it. And that's where people get kind of crazy.
Yeah. I've got case studies in the book, exactly the same thing. You've got an earthbound spirit attached to you, but your attachment has its own attachments. And from this life and past life. So there's a lot of strings you have to unwind to get to the, but yeah, it's interesting. We've got the same, experiences of reality, and this is happening and needs to be addressed. So yeah, glad we're talking about it.
And for me, that was entertaining because I never once throughout my whole experience remembering who I am in this lifetime, having channeled the whole journey for me happened within the space of 7 days. So the first time I went from bodybuilding as a 17, 18-year-old into this voice telling me that I need to go and find meditation. And back in those days, it was Hare Krishnas, hairy armpits, and vegans. That's all you could find. And that was so 180 from what I was doing, which I was picking things up, crushing them, and focusing my attention on shaping and developing myself. And so when the hubcaps are coming off, where the body cannot contain the amount of power that I was harnessing, the inner voice was go and find meditation. And when I found that and I experienced meditation for the first time, I stopped sound for 20 minutes and I went, that's it. That is the superpower I am looking for. That is where I need to go. Because it was so exciting, it was so refreshing. And then the following day, I channeled my teacher, Latsu, that I still have today on my second basis, a communion, a union that I have. And that gives me great wisdom and makes me look like I know what I'm talking about. I'm as dumb as rocks. The information flows through me. And so that was an epic. And on the same week, I performed distant healing, remote viewing, psychic abilities, and then the physical healing. And then on the flip side of that was I had what someone would consider, we refer to it as an OG, a breaking, a remembrance, a soul retrieval. But to New Age spiritualists, they would refer to it as a dark night of the soul. And I had that for 5 days, where I had every thought, every feeling, and every emotion at once. And by the third day, I couldn't get hold of my teacher, which at the time we had what we call rotary phones. Didn't have a cell phone, didn't have internet. It wasn't like we could just text someone and go, what's going on? I was at a verge of no return, and I thought the only resort was to end my life. And that was like constantly feeling into this crazy. Every thought, every feeling, every emotion. Imagine that, times that by 1,000,000. That's what I experienced. It was a car wash of everything. And it was like, from Lao Tzu's teaching, it's very clear this can happen up to 9 cycles within anyone's natural born life. I got the super steroid version, and I had all mine for this life at once. And by the end of it, doing things to distract you, I'm just so consumed with this, I'm deluded. And I was like, let me go and see a movie. Let me sit down in a movie theater, do anything. And I would have a visceral effect where something as benign as a naked woman walking across the screen would make me throw up. I throw up on someone in front of me. And this is what's going on, as it's being liberated. And as I return to my true self. And then the end result, when I finally got hold of my teacher, was, oh, that's amazing. This is great. This is the best thing ever. You don't have any idea how many people want to do this. I'm like, I don't wish this on anyone. But in retrospect, you look at this and you go, there's a method to the madness of finding that center.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Yeah. To me, go to it, go through it, get beyond it. And you're really going through it, but you keep going, you really do it properly. You do get beyond. There's a space beyond. You made it through, and you get to shine this wisdom out. I love it. Yeah. So yeah. So I feel like we could talk forever.
Yes, yes, yes. Well, I saw the little book, but I was like, you know what? Just
Yeah.
another minute. He's so
Yeah.
soft and welcoming and kind. I'm just having a great conversation. So I was very, very about
Well,
myself right now.
Oh yeah, we're overtime, or from our overtime. I also was like, yeah, let's just keep going. But yeah, I do got to run. But yeah, it's been amazing. It's been fantastic.
Yeah, no, this is incredible meeting of the minds, and two different versions of the same side of the same coin, and it's just amazing that we get to remember and reunite a bond
Yep.
that we've had in past lives, as you and I both know that, because we wouldn't be meeting if that wasn't the case.
Absolutely. I've had that feeling throughout this, where and like, we're both like, do you think we should be Westerners in some future life? Yeah, let's do that. We're walking around Asia somewhere for a few lifetimes going, yeah, let's meet up. Let's be Westerners. That'd be funny.
Yeah,
Let's be
yeah.
white guys. That'd be cool.
Yeah. I mean, it's so funny because all my students, most of them travel across the globe to come here, that are natives to Asia and specifically China, and have gone through all the Taoist temples, all the Taoist. It's like, how is it? And I mean, you're probably familiar with this word. A guilo can teach what is so ancient, because I'm not a white spirit. I may be, but this avatar is not who I really am. Yet people are so blown away with the ability to teach and master something that, in my opinion, personally, no one is teaching this alchemical process anywhere on the globe consciously right now. Anything that they teach within any of the Taoist temples and monasteries is what we refer to as rice bowl training. And so what people go, what is rice bowl? It means that they need to pay their bills. They're not going to give you the keys to the city. You are not going to be actualized or realized through this type of training. It's a diminished return, which is where people get really pissed off and irritated, because they get on that path. And in most cases, they spend 30 years sitting in a monastery somewhere getting back pain, and they don't actualize themselves. Which is, well, in that closing, I just want to just ask you one last question. What's your definition of spiritual consciousness?
Wow. It's beyond definition and beyond words, ineffable, but a felt personal experience.
Beautiful, beautiful. I love it. Over 400 podcasts, never got the same answer, as I should not.
Cool.
We are a facet. We are both individual facets of the same diamond of perfection, as we should be. And so with that, I'm going to put your social sphere and interweb under this podcast. I want people to go out, and you heard the caveat, ladies and gentlemen, don't come crying on Mark's doorstep if you just want a one-time wonder. He's not interested. We need to explore thyself if that's the case. I mean, I don't want to speak for you. Maybe you'll accept that, but from what you said,
Amen.
yeah,
Correct.
yeah. So you have teaching, you have a community, you have other people that are sharing your wisdom teachings throughout the globe. Do you want to share a little bit with the audience before we leave?
Yeah, they can go to Past Life Awakening Institute. So they can have individual personal sessions and they can have training. So I mentor people who want to give past life regression as a professional or hypnotherapy in between lives and to learn spirit releasement techniques as well. I teach all of those as individual modalities. And I do that by mentoring people through real case studies with their own clients. So, yeah, so that's a great way of learning, and they can find out about that at the Past Life Awakening Institute.
Love it, my friend. I'm just feel I don't do it often, but it's reunited and it feels good. I just love it, my friend. I love it. I'm really grateful for you. I'm grateful that the stars aligned. I'm grateful to my brother, my homie Guy, for bringing the attention to you and returning me to remembering that we were homies in a past life also. So, you know, it's
Yeah,
there are no coincidences, in my opinion.
absolutely. No, and thanks to all the beautiful universal guiding influence that reconnects us.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
beautiful. With that, I'm going to thank you, brother, and I'm going to thank the universe for bringing you into my life. I'm going to thank the audience for sharing their time with us today. I am your humble servant and Sifu, Taoist Master San Qing, and I'll see you in the next one, guys.